Sarah Martinez stood in the corner of the elegant ballroom, clutching a glass of cheap champagne while watching her husband David network with the city's elite. The crystal chandelier above cast dancing shadows across the marble floor. But Sarah felt invisible among the designer gowns and tailored suits. She wore a simple black dress from a discount store, carefully altered by her own hands to hide its humble origins. "Oh, there's David's little wife," whispered Mrs. Catherine Blackwood, the mayor's wife, to her circle of friends. "Poor thing probably doesn't even know the difference between Chanel and channel surfing." The group erupted in cruel laughter, their voices carrying just enough for Sarah to hear every word. David worked as a mid-level manager at Blackwood Industries, one of the city's largest construction companies. His salary was decent, but in this crowd of millionaires and socialites, they were considered the help. Sarah had grown accustomed to the condescending smiles and backhanded compliments that came with these mandatory company events. "Sarah, darling," called out Victoria Blackwood, Catherine's daughter-in-law, approaching with a predatory smile. "That's such an interesting dress. Very resourceful of you." Her eyes swept over Sarah's outfit with barely concealed disdain. "I heard you do alterations from home. How quaint. It must be nice to have a little hobby to keep busy." Sarah forced a polite smile, her fingers tightening around her glass. "Thank you, Victoria. I do enjoy working with my hands." She didn't mention that her little hobby had been supporting them through David's recent pay cuts, or that she had been quietly building something much larger than anyone in this room could imagine. The evening continued with Sarah enduring countless slights and dismissive comments. She watched as David desperately tried to impress his boss, Mr. Robert Blackwood, laughing too loudly at unfunny jokes and agreeing with every opinion. Robert barely acknowledged Sarah's existence, treating her like furniture when David introduced her around the room. "Your wife seems quiet," Robert commented to David during one such introduction, his tone suggesting this was not a compliment. "Not much of a conversationalist, is she?" David's face flushed red with embarrassment. "Sarah's just tired from work," he mumbled, shooting his wife an apologetic glance that somehow managed to feel like blame. As the night wore on, Sarah excused herself to the ladies' room, needing a moment away from the suffocating atmosphere. In the mirror, she stared at her reflection, seeing a woman who had learned to make herself small to fit into her husband's world. Her phone buzzed with a text message from her assistant. "The Singapore deal closed. Congratulations, boss. That's 3 major acquisitions this month." Sarah quickly deleted the message and returned to the ballroom, where she found the Blackwood women discussing their upcoming charity auction. "We're looking for donations," Catherine announced loudly. "Though, I suppose some people contribute what they can, even if it's not much." Her eyes landed meaningfully on Sarah. "I'd be happy to contribute," Sarah replied quietly, already knowing she would write a check that would shock them all, though they would never know it came from her. The evening finally ended with David driving them home in their modest sedan while luxury cars pulled away in every direction. "You could have tried harder tonight," David said, his voice heavy with disappointment. "These people could really help my career, but you just stood there like a statue." Sarah stared out the window at the city lights, each one representing a business, a deal, a possibility. Somewhere out there was her empire, hidden behind shell companies and carefully constructed facades. Tomorrow she would make decisions that would affect thousands of jobs and millions of dollars. But tonight, she was just David's quiet wife who didn't know how to make conversation. "I'm sorry," she whispered, though the apology wasn't really for him. It was for herself, for allowing this charade to continue for so long. But she had her reasons that went deeper than David's fragile ego or the Blackwoods' casual cruelty. As they pulled into their driveway, Sarah made a silent promise to herself. Soon, very soon, the truth would come out. And when it did, everyone who had looked down on her tonight would finally understand exactly who they had been dealing with. The quiet woman in the corner had been taking notes, and she never forgot a slight. The next morning, Sarah woke before dawn and drove across town to a gleaming skyscraper that pierced the morning sky like a steel needle. The building bore the name Martinez Holdings in elegant silver letters, though few people in the city made the connection between that name and the quiet woman who now stepped out of an elevator on the 42nd floor. "Good morning, Ms. Martinez." Her secretary Jennifer greeted her as Sarah entered the executive suite. "The Tokyo team is waiting for your call, and the London office sent the quarterly reports you requested." Sarah shed her modest exterior like a snake shedding skin. Here, in her domain, she moved with the confidence of someone who controlled a $2 billion empire. Her morning routine included reviewing acquisitions, approving major expenditures, and making strategic decisions that would ripple through international markets. The irony wasn't lost on her that David worked for Blackwood Industries, a company she had been quietly circling like a predator for months. Through a maze of holding companies and investment firms, she already owned 15% of their stock. Robert Blackwood had no idea that the woman he had dismissed last night could buy and sell his company 3 times over. Her phone rang, and she answered with the authority that came naturally to her in this environment. "Martinez Holdings, this is Sarah." "Ms. Martinez, this is James Chen from our Hong Kong office. The infrastructure deal with the Singapore government is finalized. We're now the primary contractor for their new port expansion project. The contract is worth $800 million over 5 years. Sarah smiled, remembering how Victoria Blackwood had called her alterations work a little hobby just hours earlier. If only she knew that those same hands that hemmed dresses also signed contracts worth more than most people saw in a lifetime. After hanging up, Sarah turned her attention to a file that had been consuming her thoughts for weeks. Blackwood Industries was hemorrhaging money on bad investments and poor management decisions. Their stock price had dropped 30% in the past year, and industry insiders whispered about potential bankruptcy. "Jennifer, schedule a meeting with our acquisition team for this afternoon," Sarah instructed. "It's time to discuss the Blackwood situation." The meeting took place in Martinez Holdings' main conference room, where floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city. Sarah's team consisted of the best financial minds money could buy, each expert in their field and fiercely loyal to the woman who had built this empire from nothing. "Robert Blackwood is drowning," reported Marcus Webb, her head of acquisitions. "Their construction division is losing contracts to more competitive bidders, and their real estate investments are underwater. They need an immediate cash infusion of at least $50 million just to stay afloat through the next quarter." Sarah studied the financial projections spread across the mahogany table. Blackwood Industries employed over 3,000 people, including her own husband. A hostile takeover would be swift and profitable, but it would also expose her identity. She wasn't ready for that revelation, not yet. "What about a silent partnership?" she asked. "We provide the capital they need, but through intermediaries. Let them think they're dealing with overseas investors." Her legal team exchanged glances. This was vintage Sarah Martinez, always thinking 3 moves ahead, always maintaining her carefully constructed anonymity while positioning herself for maximum advantage. "We could structure it through our Cayman Islands subsidiary," suggested Patricia Holmes, her chief legal counsel. "Blackwood would never know the money came from Martinez Holdings. To them, it would appear as foreign investment from unknown benefactors." That afternoon, while David was at work struggling to meet his sales quotas, Sarah was orchestrating a $50 million bailout of his employer. The beautiful irony of the situation wasn't lost on her. The same people who had mocked her poverty were about to be saved by her wealth, and they would never know it. By evening, Sarah had transformed back into the quiet wife who greeted her husband at the door with dinner warming in the oven. David looked exhausted, His tie loosened and his shoulders slumped with defeat. "Rough day?" she asked, knowing full well that his company's stock had jumped 12% after news of the mysterious investment had leaked to the financial press. "Actually, something amazing happened," David said, his eyes lighting up for the first time in months. "Some foreign investors pumped a huge amount of money into the company. Mr. Blackwood called an all-hands meeting to announce that we're saved. There might even be bonuses this year." Sarah smiled and kissed his cheek, tasting the salt of his relief. "That's wonderful news, honey. You must be so relieved." As they ate dinner, David excitedly recounted how Robert Blackwood had strutted around the office like a peacock, taking full credit for attracting such significant investment. The man had no idea that his company's savior was sitting in his own ballroom the night before, enduring his family's condescending remarks while holding his financial fate in her hands. Later that night, as David slept peacefully beside her, Sarah stared at the ceiling and contemplated her next move. The Blackwood family was now indebted to her, though they didn't know it. They owed their continued prosperity to the woman they had dismissed as insignificant, but Sarah Martinez was far from finished with them. This was just the opening move in a much larger game, one where she held all the cards and her opponents didn't even know they were playing. 3 weeks after the mysterious investment saved Blackwood Industries, Sarah found herself once again enduring another social gathering, this time at the Blackwood family estate. The sprawling mansion overlooked the river, its manicured gardens, and marble fountains designed to intimidate visitors with displays of wealth and power. Catherine Blackwood held court on the terrace, regaling her guests with stories of how her husband's business acumen had attracted such significant foreign investment. "Robert always said that true leaders find a way to turn crisis into opportunity," she declared, raising her champagne glass. "These international investors obviously recognized quality when they saw it." Sarah sipped her wine and said nothing, though she knew every detail of those investors because she had personally selected each member of the consortium that now owned a controlling interest in Robert's company. Through her network of shell companies, she had quietly acquired another 20% of Blackwood Industries' stock in the weeks following her initial investment. "Sarah, dear," Victoria Blackwood approached with her usual saccharine smile, "I heard you've been doing alterations for some of the ladies in Riverside Heights. How entrepreneurial of you." The backhanded compliment was delivered with practiced precision, designed to sound supportive while emphasizing Sarah's lower social status. "I enjoy the work," Sarah replied evenly, not mentioning that her alterations business was actually a front she maintained to explain her daytime absences. In reality, she spent those hours running a global empire from her downtown headquarters. "Well, it's important to stay busy," Victoria continued. "Idle hands and all that. Though I imagine it must be difficult to understand the complexities of real business when you're focused on such domestic pursuits." David, who had been hovering nearby, shifted uncomfortably. Sarah could see the embarrassment in his eyes, the way he wished his wife could match the sophistication of the other women in their social circle. If only he knew that the woman he was ashamed of had just closed a deal to build 3 shopping centers in Dubai, or that her signature on a contract that morning had created 500 new jobs in Malaysia. The conversation was interrupted by Robert Blackwood himself, who approached their group with the swagger of a man who believed he had recently pulled off a major business coup. "David, my boy," he boomed, clapping Sarah's husband on the shoulder, "I hope you're learning from this recent experience. This is how real business gets done at the highest levels." "Yes, sir," David replied eagerly. "I'm just grateful to be part of such a successful organization." Robert's gaze barely acknowledged Sarah before returning to her husband. "The key is recognizing opportunity when it presents itself. These foreign investors didn't choose us by accident. They recognized the Blackwood name as synonymous with excellence and reliability." Sarah nearly choked on her wine. The foreign investors had chosen Blackwood Industries precisely because it was failing, making it the perfect acquisition target. Robert's company was now essentially owned by Martinez Holdings, though he remained blissfully unaware of this fact. "Perhaps," Sarah said quietly, speaking for the first time since Robert had joined their group. The investors saw potential for improvement rather than existing excellence. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Robert's face flushed slightly, not accustomed to being questioned, especially by someone he considered insignificant. Victoria's eyes widened in shock at Sarah's boldness, while David looked as though he wanted to disappear into the marble floor. "I beg your pardon?" Robert's voice carried a dangerous edge. Sarah met his gaze steadily. "Sometimes outsiders can see problems that insiders miss. Maybe they invested because they believed the company could be run more efficiently with proper guidance." The silence stretched uncomfortably. Catherine Blackwood appeared at her husband's side, sensing tension, like a shark smelling blood in the water. "I'm sure Sarah didn't mean to imply anything critical," she said with a frozen smile. "After all, what would someone in her position know about high-level business strategy?" "Of course," Sarah replied, her voice carrying just the faintest hint of irony. "What could I possibly know about business?" That night, Sarah made a decision that would accelerate her timeline considerably. She instructed her team to begin the second phase of her plan, one that would give her direct control over Blackwood Industries' operations while still maintaining her anonymity. "I want you to establish a management consulting firm," she told Marcus Webb the next morning. "Staff it with our best people, but keep it completely separate from Martinez Holdings on paper. Then arrange for this consulting firm to approach Blackwood Industries with an offer to help them maximize their recent investment." Marcus grinned, understanding the elegant trap his boss was setting. "So we get paid to take control of their daily operations while they think they're hiring outside experts to help them succeed." "Exactly. And I want to personally review every major decision they make. If Robert Blackwood wants to credit himself with attracting investment, let's see how he handles having real business people looking over his shoulder." Within a week, Blackwood Industries had hired Sterling management consultants to help optimize their operations and ensure maximum return on their recent investment. Robert signed the contract himself, never suspecting that he was essentially paying Sarah Martinez to take control of his company. The first Sterling management consultant to arrive at Blackwood Industries was Dr. Amanda Foster, one of Sarah's most trusted executives. She carried credentials from Harvard Business School and 20 years of experience turning around failing companies. Her job was to assess every aspect of Blackwood's operations and report back to her real boss. Meanwhile, Sarah continued her double life, playing the role of David's unremarkable wife while secretly orchestrating the complete restructuring of his employer. She attended dinner parties where the Blackwood family praised their own business genius, never knowing that every major decision their company made now required approval from the woman they dismissed as a housewife with a sewing hobby. The irony was delicious, but Sarah knew it was also temporary. Soon, very soon, the truth would have to come out. And when it did, the shockwaves would reshape everyone's understanding of who held real power in their carefully ordered social hierarchy. 2 months into Sterling Management's consultation with Blackwood Industries, the company was experiencing unprecedented growth. Productivity had increased by 40%, 3 major new contracts had been secured, and employee satisfaction was at an all-time high. Robert Blackwood strutted around town taking full credit for the transformation, while Sarah watched from the shadows, orchestrating every success. The turning point came on a Tuesday morning when David burst through their front door, his face pale with panic. "Sarah, we need to talk," he said, his voice shaking. "Something terrible has happened at work." Sarah looked up from her sewing machine, where she had been hemming a dress for Mrs. Patterson from down the street. Her cover story required constant maintenance, and she had become genuinely skilled at alterations over the years. "What's wrong, honey?" "There's going to be an investigation," David said, collapsing into their worn kitchen chair. "The State Business Commission received an anonymous tip that someone's been manipulating Blackwood Industries' stock price. They're looking into all the recent investments and consulting contracts. Sarah's needle paused mid-stitch. She had been expecting this development, though perhaps not quite so soon. Someone had clearly noticed the rapid transformation of a failing company and grown suspicious. In the business world, success that dramatic rarely happened without leaving fingerprints. "What does that mean for you?" she asked, though she already knew the investigation would ultimately lead back to her carefully constructed web of shell companies. "It means they're going to examine every financial transaction, every consultant recommendation, every decision made in the past 3 months, David explained. "And if they find anything suspicious, people are going to lose their jobs, including me." That afternoon, while David worried about his future, Sarah called an emergency meeting with her legal team. The conference room at Martinez Holdings buzzed with tension as Patricia Holmes spread documents across the table. "The investigation is being led by State Attorney General Maria Santos," Patricia reported. "She's known for being thorough and incorruptible. If she digs deep enough, she'll eventually trace the money back to you, regardless of how many shell companies we've used." Sarah studied the legal brief, weighing her options. She could abandon the Blackwood acquisition entirely, selling her shares through intermediaries and walking away clean. Or she could stay and fight, which would almost certainly expose her identity. "What are the risks if we stay the course?" she asked. Marcus Webb pulled up financial projections on his laptop. "Blackwood Industries is now worth 3 times what it was when we started. If we're forced to sell our position, we're looking at a profit of roughly $600 million. But if we can complete the full acquisition, we'd control a company worth over $1 billion. And the personal risks?" Patricia didn't hesitate. "Prison time if they can prove market manipulation, massive fines, public humiliation, the end of your anonymity, and probably your marriage." That evening, Sarah sat on her back porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Her phone rang constantly with updates from her team, but she let each call go to voicemail. For the first time in years, she needed to think without the constant pressure of making decisions that affected thousands of people and billions of dollars. David found her there an hour later, bringing her a cup of tea and sitting beside her, on their weathered wooden bench. "I'm sorry I was so upset this morning," he said quietly. "I know you have your own worries, and here I am dumping my problems on you." Sarah almost laughed at the irony. Her husband was apologizing for bothering her with concerns about an investigation into her own company. "Tell me about your day," she said instead. "How are people at work handling the news?" "It's chaos," David admitted. "Robert Blackwood is running around like a chicken with its head cut off, screaming about government overreach and demanding that Sterling Management provide documentation for every recommendation they've made. The consultants are scrambling to respond to subpoenas." Sarah sipped her tea, tasting the bitter herbs that reminded her of her childhood in her grandmother's garden. Before the empire, before the billions, before the careful lies that had become her daily existence. "What if the investigation finds something?" she asked. "Then we're all finished," David said simply. "Not just me, but everyone who works there. 3,000 families depend on Blackwood Industries for their livelihood. If the company collapses because of some financial scandal, it'll devastate the entire community." The weight of his words settled over Sarah like a heavy blanket. She had started this game as revenge against people who had humiliated her. But somewhere along the way, it had become about much more than personal satisfaction. Real people with real families now depended on decisions she made in boardrooms they would never see. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer. "Attorney General Santos has requested a meeting with Sterling Management tomorrow at 9 a.m. She wants to discuss the Blackwood Consulting contract personally." Sarah stared at the message, knowing that tomorrow would force her to make a choice that would change everything. She could send Amanda Foster to handle the meeting and maintain her anonymity while potentially facing criminal charges later. Or she could walk into that government office herself and finally reveal the truth to a world that had spent years underestimating her. As if reading her thoughts, David reached over and took her hand. "Whatever happens with this investigation, I want you to know that I'm grateful for everything you do to support us. I know I don't always show it, but I see how hard you work with your alterations business, trying to help make ends meet. You're stronger than I give you credit for." Sarah squeezed his hand, her heart breaking at his genuine gratitude for sacrifices he couldn't begin to understand. Tomorrow, she would have to decide whether to protect the man she loved from the truth about who she really was, or trust him, with a revelation that would shatter everything he believed about their life together. The sun disappeared behind the horizon, and Sarah Martinez, CEO of a $2 billion empire, sat in the darkness holding her husband's hand and preparing for the most important decision of her life. The next morning, Sarah stood in front of her bedroom mirror at dawn, making the most important wardrobe choice of her life. She could dress as the humble wife David knew, or as the powerful CEO she had hidden for so long. Her reflection stared back, split between two identities that could no longer coexist. She chose power. The tailored navy suit fit perfectly, custom-made by designers who had no idea their client lived a double life. Her hair was pulled back in the severe style she wore for board meetings, and her shoes clicked with authority against the marble floor of the state attorney general's office building. Maria Santos was waiting in conference room B, a woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. Across from her sat Amanda Foster, Sarah's consultant, looking nervous for the first time since Sarah had known her. "Ms. Foster," Attorney General Santos began, "thank you for coming. I have some questions about Sterling Management's relationship with Blackwood Industries." "Of course," Amanda replied, though her voice carried a slight tremor. "We're happy to cooperate with any investigation." The door opened, and Sarah walked in, her presence immediately commanding attention. Amanda's eyes widened in shock, but she quickly recovered, understanding that her boss had made a decision that would change everything. "I'm sorry I'm late," Sarah said, extending her hand to the Attorney General. "Sarah Martinez, CEO of Martinez Holdings. I believe you have questions about my company's investments." The silence in the room was deafening. Santos studied Sarah, with the intensity of someone reassessing everything she thought she knew about the case. Amanda sat frozen, waiting to see how her boss would navigate this moment of truth. "Ms. Martinez," Santos said slowly, "are you saying that Martinez Holdings is behind the Sterling Management consulting contract with Blackwood Industries?" "Among other things, yes." Sarah took a seat at the conference table with the confidence of someone accustomed to controlling rooms full of powerful people. "Martinez Holdings owns controlling interest in Blackwood Industries through a series of legitimate investment vehicles. Sterling Management is one of our subsidiaries." Santos leaned back in her chair, pieces of a puzzle suddenly clicking into place. "And you've been operating under assumed names and shell companies because I value my privacy," Sarah replied evenly. "Everything we've done has been completely legal. We identified a failing company, invested capital to save it, and provided management expertise to ensure our investment would be profitable. The result has been job security for 3,000 employees and significant economic benefit to this community." The Attorney General pulled out a thick file, spreading documents across the table. "According to our investigation, someone with inside knowledge has been making strategic moves in Blackwood Industries stock for months. The timing suggests access to non-public information." Sarah smiled, recognizing the trap being set. "Attorney General Santos, I assume you've done your research on Martinez Holdings?" "Some," Santos admitted, "though your company seems remarkably good at avoiding public attention." "We've been in business for 12 years, Sarah continued. "Our portfolio includes construction companies, real estate developments, and infrastructure projects in 37 countries. We employ 18,000 people worldwide and generate approximately $2 billion in annual revenue. Everything is properly documented and audited by international accounting firms." Amanda watched in amazement as her boss systematically dismantled every concern the Attorney General raised. This was Sarah Martinez in her element, a master negotiator, who had built an empire by being smarter and more prepared than everyone else in the room. The question remains, Santos pressed, why the secrecy? Why not operate transparently from the beginning? Sarah's expression softened slightly, revealing a glimpse of the woman behind the corporate facade. Because, Attorney General Santos, I've learned that people make assumptions about what women can and cannot accomplish. My husband works for Blackwood Industries. He has no idea that his wife owns the company he works for. I've been protecting both of us from the complications that truth would create. The admission hung in the air like a confession. Santos studied Sarah with new interest, recognizing something she hadn't expected to find in this investigation. Let me understand this correctly, Santos said. You've built a $2 billion empire in secret while maintaining the public appearance of being a housewife who does alterations? Among other things, yes, Sarah repeated her earlier phrase. Santos closed the file in front of her. Ms. Martinez, while your methods have been unconventional, our investigation has found no evidence of illegal activity. However, I am concerned about the potential for conflicts of interest given your personal relationships. Which is why, Sarah said, reaching into her briefcase, I'm prepared to make full disclosure to all relevant parties. Starting today, Martinez, Holdings will operate transparently in all future dealings with Blackwood Industries. She placed a document on the table that made Amanda's eyes widen. It was a letter of intent to purchase the remaining shares of Blackwood Industries, offering current shareholders a premium price that would make everyone involved very wealthy. You're going public with the acquisition? Santos asked. I'm going public with everything, Sarah replied. The secrecy served its purpose, but maintaining it is no longer worth the cost. As the meeting concluded, Sarah felt a strange sense of relief mixed with terror. After years of carefully controlling information, she was about to unleash a truth that would shock everyone who thought they knew her. Her phone buzzed with a text from David. How did your doctor's appointment go? Hope everything is okay. She had told him she had a medical appointment to explain her absence this morning. Another lie in a web of deceptions that was about to unravel completely. Sarah stared at the message, knowing that in a few hours, David would discover that his wife wasn't just successful. She was the most powerful person he had ever met. The question was whether their marriage would survive the revelation or whether the foundation of lies she had built their life on would destroy everything they had together. The game was almost over, and Sarah Martinez was finally ready to show the world exactly who she had been all along. The news broke at exactly 3:47 p.m. on a Thursday afternoon that would be remembered in the city's business circles for decades to come. Sarah had orchestrated the revelation with the same precision she brought to every major business decision, ensuring maximum impact while maintaining control of the narrative. The press release was simple and devastating. Martinez Holdings announces completion of Blackwood Industries acquisition. Below the headline, reporters found details that sent shockwaves through the financial community. The mysterious foreign investors who had saved Blackwood Industries were revealed to be shell companies owned by Sarah Martinez, a local woman who had built a $2 billion empire while living in apparent modest circumstances. David was in a budget meeting when his assistant knocked on the conference room door, her face pale with confusion. Mr. Martinez, she whispered, there are reporters in the lobby asking about your wife. The drive home was the longest 20 minutes of David's life. His phone rang constantly with calls from colleagues, friends, and journalists, but he ignored them all. Nothing made sense. The woman who hemmed curtains for their neighbors couldn't possibly own the company he worked for. There had to be some mistake, some confusion about names. He found Sarah in their kitchen, standing at the counter making tea as if this were any ordinary day. She had changed from her power suit back into the comfortable clothes he was accustomed to seeing her wear, but something fundamental had shifted. She carried herself differently, as though a weight she had been bearing for years had finally been lifted. Sarah, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Please tell me this is some kind of joke. She turned to face him, and David saw a stranger looking back. Not a different person, but the same woman he had married with layers of pretense, finally stripped away. Her eyes held depths he had never noticed, intelligence and strength that had been carefully hidden behind a facade of domestic simplicity. It's not a joke, she said gently. David, we need to talk. The conversation that followed would replay in David's mind for months afterward. Sarah told him everything. How she had started her first company at 22 with money borrowed from her grandmother, how she had systematically built an empire while he was establishing his own career, how she had chosen to hide her success, to protect both of them from complications she wasn't ready to handle. You've been lying to me for 12 years, David said, his voice hollow with shock. Our entire marriage has been built on a lie. No, Sarah replied firmly. Our marriage has been built on love, shared dreams, and mutual support. The lie was allowing people to underestimate me because it was easier than fighting their assumptions every day. David struggled to process the magnitude of what he was learning. The woman he had felt sorry for, the wife he had sometimes been embarrassed. By owned buildings he passed every day on his way to work. She employed thousands of people and made decisions that affected entire communities. The Blackwoods, he said suddenly, understanding flooding his features. They treated you like garbage, and all along you could have bought and sold them 100 times over. Sarah nodded, remembering every slight, every condescending comment, every dismissive look. They saw what they expected to see, a quiet woman who didn't understand their world. The phone rang, and David answered automatically. It was Robert Blackwood, his voice shaking with a mixture of rage and panic. David, what the hell is going on? The reporters are saying your wife owns my company. This has to be some kind of mistake. David looked at Sarah, who nodded calmly. No mistake, Mr. Blackwood. My wife is Sarah Martinez of Martinez Holdings. I'm as surprised as you are. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for nearly 30 seconds before Robert found his voice. Your wife? The woman who hems dresses? She owns Blackwood Industries? Apparently so, David replied, the absurdity of the situation finally hitting him. And from what I'm reading in these news reports, she's been saving your company while you took credit for attracting mysterious foreign investors. When he hung up, Sarah was smiling for the first time since the revelation had begun. How do you feel about being married to your boss? She asked. David sat down heavily in their kitchen chair, the same chair where he had worried about investigations and job security just days earlier. I don't know how I feel about anything right now. This changes everything. Does it? Sarah asked. I'm still the same person who makes you coffee every morning and listens to you complain about traffic. I still love terrible romantic comedies and burn dinner when I'm distracted. The only difference is that now you know why I was sometimes distracted. Over the following weeks, the city buzzed with gossip and speculation. The Blackwood family found themselves in the humiliating position of owing their continued prosperity to the woman they had spent years dismissing. Catherine Blackwood actually fainted when she learned that the poor wife she had mocked at dinner parties was worth more than their entire extended family combined. Victoria Blackwood appeared on Sarah's doorstep one afternoon, tears streaming down her face as she apologized for years of condescending treatment. I had no idea, she sobbed. If we had known who you were. You would have treated me with respect only because of my money, Sarah replied. That tells me everything I need to know about your character. The transformation in how people treated Sarah was both immediate and revealing. Former acquaintances who had barely acknowledged her existence suddenly wanted to be best friends. Invitations poured in from social clubs that had never considered her worthy of membership. The same people who had whispered about her discount. Store dresses now praised her for being refreshingly down to earth. David struggled with his new reality for months. Some days he felt proud to be married to such an accomplished woman. Other days he felt emasculated by the revelation that his wife had been supporting them financially while he worried about his modest salary. Their marriage counselor, Dr. Patricia Webb, helped them navigate the complex emotions that came with such a dramatic shift in their relationship dynamic. "The question isn't whether Sarah deceived you," Dr. Webb explained during one particularly difficult session. "The question is whether you can accept that your wife is more successful than you ever imagined, and whether that threatens your sense of self-worth." David eventually came to understand that Sarah's secrecy hadn't been about not trusting him, but about protecting them both from a world that wasn't ready to accept a woman who chose to hide her power rather than flaunt it. She had sacrificed recognition and acclaim to maintain their normal life, and that sacrifice had been motivated by love, not deception. The business world reacted with fascination to Sarah's story. She became a reluctant icon for successful women who had faced discrimination and doubt. Harvard Business School invited her to speak about building companies while maintaining privacy. Forbes featured her on their cover with the headline, "The Invisible Billionaire." But perhaps the most satisfying moment came 6 months after the revelation, at the annual Chamber of Commerce Gala. Sarah arrived in a custom gown that cost more than most people's cars, her confidence radiating like a beacon. David walked beside her, no longer embarrassed, but genuinely proud of the remarkable woman he had married. Robert Blackwood approached them nervously, his former arrogance replaced by the awkward deference of a man who knew his livelihood depended on someone he had previously dismissed. "Mrs. Martinez," he said, his voice carefully respectful, "I wanted to thank you again for your investment in our company. The employees are all very grateful." Sarah smiled graciously, though her eyes held a glint of satisfaction. "I'm glad we could help, Robert. After all, what's the point of having resources if you don't use them to support your community?" Catherine Blackwood hovered nearby, clearly wanting to approach but uncertain of her reception. When she finally worked up the courage, her words tumbled out in a rush of genuine remorse. "Sarah, I owe you an enormous apology. The way we treated you was inexcusable, regardless of what we thought we knew about your circumstances." "Thank you for saying that, Catherine," Sarah replied. "I hope it's taught you something about making assumptions about people based on appearances." As the evening progressed, Sarah watched the same social dynamics play out that she had observed for years, but now she was on the other side of them. People sought her opinion, laughed at her jokes, and treated her words as profound wisdom. The only difference was that now they knew her net worth. David found her on the terrace later that evening, looking out over the city lights that twinkled like earthbound stars. Many of those lights represented businesses she owned, buildings she had financed, projects she had approved. Her empire stretched far beyond what was visible from this vantage point, reaching across oceans to touch lives she would never meet. "Any regrets?" he asked, taking her hand. Sarah considered the question seriously. The revelation had brought its own complications. Privacy she had cherished was gone forever. Every business decision now made headlines. Their quiet life had been replaced by constant attention from media, investors, and social climbers. But it had also brought freedom. No more pretending to be less than she was. No more biting her tongue when people made ignorant assumptions. No more hiding her accomplishments or apologizing.